I am Karen Beach with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library Foundation, and it is great to have so many of you joining us this evening. We appreciate that. It is our second try at a virtual author event. We always love trying to connect readers and writers, and so while we're all staying home and trying to stay safe, we appreciate you joining us, and hopefully this will be a nice welcome break in your day. I want to give a couple of quick shout out, a couple of housekeeping details, and then we will turn it over to Cathy. A quick shout out to Town Brewing. They are the location where we normally have Final Draft when everything is open. So we're coming to you from our homes this evening. If you're on the lookout though for a great beer or a bite to eat, give Town Brewing a call tonight, or check out their website and maybe swing by after we hear from Cathy. Also, Park Road Books and Main Street Books, two fantastic local bookstores, are on hand to sell you Cathy's books and any other book needs that you might have. So make sure that you check them out as well. Please use the comments section here on Facebook. I think many of you have found that and have said hello. So hello to everyone, and ask Cathy questions. We'll get to that here in a few minutes. So use that, and I'll make sure to pass on some of your great questions to Cathy. It is our great pleasure to welcome Cathy Pickens as our guest author tonight. Cathy has such a really interesting, varied background. She's been a lawyer and a university provost, and my favorite, a clogging and ballroom coach. So I loved reading that about Cathy. I had not had a chance to meet Cathy until we were testing this out the other evening. So I know you're going to enjoy Cathy tonight. She is a graduate of Clemson and also University of South Carolina Law School, for you Clemson and Gamecock fans out there. Her debut novel, Southern Fried, was named one of the best first mysteries in 2004. And she went on to write a whole Southern Fried mystery series. And I'm particularly interested in knowing why Cathy has moved from those Southern mysteries now to true crime. So everyone, welcome Cathy Pickens, author of Charlotte True Crime Stories.
Thank you, Karen. This has been an interesting journey, and one that didn't happen overnight. People often ask me, why did you stop writing mystery fiction? I said, well, the question is, why did I start reading true crime in order to write mystery fiction? And years ago, 100 years ago, you could read short form stories of crime cases. And there were some writers, a Scottish barrister named William Rufford and a fellow named Edmund Pearson, and they wrote just witty and insightful stories that really unraveled and explained cases in their context. And I've always loved those. But then along came radio, and then television, and then podcasting, and then entire networks devoted to nothing but true crime stories, and those sorts of books disappeared. But I got to thinking, Charlotte is such a fascinating place, and there's so many really interesting stories that people don't know. Now, I'm not one to want to dwell in the mind of a seriously deranged person or to dig into the gruesome gore of a story. I'm more interested in the people involved on both sides of a crime case, the families affected, and what that says about a place and about us as a people. And Charlotte just has loads of really good stories. For instance, I drew a rather large half circle around Charlotte. I didn't dip into South Carolina for this book, but there's a fella from Concord named Gaston Means. Now, if there are folks who are fans of Empire Boardwalk, they may have caught his name. He's actually a character on that television show, but they have no idea he's a real person. He grew up in Concord. He sold Turkish toweling for Concord Mills in New York City, made gobs of money. But apparently, if you were 200 pounds and kind of doughy and soft with big dimples and just a sweet Southern drawl, you had other opportunities in New York City at the turn of the last century. And so he decided he could make a lot more money swindling women. than he could selling Turkish toweling for Kenna Mills. So he ends up in the Harding administration, and he's in the Justice Department, and he carries his swindling skills there. And it's just a story that if you made it up, no one would believe it. But here it is right here with its strong Charlotte connections. He got away with murder. He swindled the woman who owned the Hope Diamond, tricked her into thinking she could help rescue the Lindbergh baby in the 1920s. It's just an incredible tale. And that's only one of them. There's so many places where Charlotte has been defined by its crime. A lot of people don't know that we had Chicago gangsters here in the 30s. And one of our chief of police at the time helped break up one of the large Chicago mobster gangs in the 1930s. A lot of people who grew up in Charlotte may know about the motorcycle gangs here. That was one of the things my daddy worried about when I moved to Charlotte from South Carolina. He knew three things about Charlotte. One was motorcycle gangs, one was professional wrestling, and the other was Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. So he wasn't sure that any of those things were good. But the motorcycle gangs here in the 70s and 80s were quite a story. This was one of only 2 or 3 locations in the entire country that had major headquarters for both the Hells Angels and the outlaw motorcycle gangs. And they controlled most of the drugs and prostitution in Charlotte during that time. And it's just, I used to drive by this particular graveyard on the way to get my hair cut. That's very much on my mind right now, getting my hair cut, since I haven't been able to. But I would drive by the cemetery out in Mint Hill, and lo and behold, guess where the 2 guys who came to Charlotte to start the Hells Angels chapter are buried after their horrible murders some years ago. So there's all these intertwinings and connections in Charlotte that I don't find gruesome, I find interesting, because after all, every place has its crime and its dark side. And I just think that helps us understand ourselves better than we might otherwise. I didn't know if you want to keep asking questions or if you wanted me to just talk, because I can tell more stories. We're getting used to our format here. One of my favorite stories, and I've told it a lot, involved a young woman who worked in the textile mills in the 1920s. And those were hard jobs. They didn't pay well. And this young woman was married, but it turned out her husband was married to someone else at the same time he was supposedly married to her. And he was bootlegging, and he was running all kinds of scams and running around on her. And then he came in one day and just told her that he was going to leave. Well, she, to hear her tell it, because again, if you're cute and little and can flirt, you can get away with a lot. And she says, well, I didn't know the knife was so short. I was so sharp, excuse me. I was just hugging him, hoping I could talk him into staying and seeing if he still loved me. And he didn't. Well, she practically decapitated him. And the powers that be in Charlotte decided that this was going to be the end of women getting away with murder, because it had happened more than once. And so it went to trial. She attracted as volunteers some of the best defense lawyers in Charlotte, and was acquitted by an all-male jury, because of course all juries were all male then. And so her nickname became Razor Girl. And in true Charlotte fashion, they were selling little straight razor tie pins on the courthouse steps, and people were clamoring, particularly women, clamoring to get seats there in the courtroom. Well, I didn't know until I was working on this book that wasn't the first sort of carnival trial, or the only carnival trial that Charlotte had had. The former sheriff here, Chip Bailey, is a friend of mine, also a writer. And so I was asking him, what were your favorite cases in Charlotte? And he says, oh, by far, don't forget the Bhagwan. And those who've been in Charlotte anytime at all know the Bhagwan Shri Rajneesh. He wasn't here long, only 9 days. He flew his 2 Lear jets into the Charlotte airport and was stopped by federal agents trying to leave the country. What a lot of people in Charlotte don't know is that he was the head of a sex and free love cult in Oregon that was responsible for the single largest bioterrorism attack that's ever happened on US soil. To this day, the largest bioterrorism attack. And if you have Netflix, you can binge watch Wild Wild Country. A couple of guys decided to do a story about the Rajneeshis and Sri Rajneesh. And they just have a snippet in there about Charlotte. I don't think necessarily a very complimentary one all the time, but Charlotte had a whale of a good time with him here. The Bhagwan did not like niece's liver pudding for breakfast. He did not like grits. There were just so many things he didn't like about the South. But we thoroughly enjoyed his visit here. And his hearing in the federal courthouse attracted all kinds of folks, including vendors selling t-shirts that say, "We bagged Bhagwan." Apparently you can still find those on eBay. I haven't found one of the straight razor pens yet. That would be lovely to have in the collection. But
Cathy, your book is just full of so many wonderful stories. And I grew up here in Charlotte, so I was delighted to read the one that you already kind of mentioned and that you wrote in the book called The Angel's Funeral. Because when I was actually, so that was about the motorcycle gang. When I was actually, it would have been junior high, we called it at the time. We were actually dismissed early the day of the funeral so that we could get home and be out of the way, because I grew up, I went to school more on the east side, Mint Hill area, and the funeral procession was going to come through, and they didn't want us out and about when school got dismissed. So we got out early that day. And I always remember that. So when I was reading your book and I came across that one, I was like, such a great memory.
Because they came from Marshville. They had the funeral in Marshville to the cemetery there. And I think the Charlotte Observer sent every reporter and photographer they had. I mean, the bylines in the newspaper are incredible. And I have to give a shout out to Sheila Baumgartner and the folks in the Carolina room there at the main library, because the resources there are just phenomenal. And she is so knowledgeable. She's actually the one who uncovered the Razor Girl story for a journalist some years ago. But the photographs of the biker funeral are just incappreciate
Well, we appreciate
that y'all were home, but y'all were probably the only ones at home. Everybody else was there watching the funeral.
Appreciate that shout out for our Robinson Spangler Carolina room. You actually acknowledged our staff there, Sheila, and our staff in your book. So we appreciate that. We're going to take some questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the comments section and we'll see those, and I'll make sure to ask a few of those to Cathy. But I have a couple of questions myself. And that is, did you grow up using libraries? Kind of what's your library story? And I happen to notice that you do have some Nancy Drew books behind you. So tell us about that as well.
I do indeed. Well, that's where it all started, was Nancy Drew. As I understand it, the Library Association didn't allow libraries to acquire Nancy Drew. So I have my own. And I tell people, my husband has his Hardy Boy books. And when I found out he had Hardy Boy's books in the original paper covers, I never saw Nancy Drew with paper covers. But he has his from when he was a little kid. And I tell people that's why I married him, was because he had his Hardy Boy collection. But I actually grew up, our driveway was a very long driveway. I lived in a very small town in upstate South Carolina, and our driveway ended at the front door of the library. Quite literally, it came down a long hill, and there it was. And so we always called them the library ladies, because they were all ladies at the time. But one of them saw I kept being interested in writing, and she says, "Well, perhaps we have some things you'd like to have." And she took me down to the musty smelling basement and gave me the back issues they were about to throw away of the Writer magazine, and that was my study books forever. After I sprayed them down with Lysol, we were all familiar with that now, just because they smell musty. But it was such a generous and observation on her part, and such a fantastic gift, because that was my education about creative writing, along with my reading, of course. But oh my gosh, I grew up in libraries.
That's a great story. Tell me, because I'm always so curious. So you were trained as a lawyer, you graduated from law school, you were a lawyer, and we've come across a number of authors who were lawyers and then became authors. What is that connection? What do you think that's about?
We were writers who went to law school. That's what it was. I can remember it. And I obviously wasn't a precocious child, because I didn't really realize somehow until I was 11 years old that real people wrote books. And I was an avid reader. So I go in and tell my mom, I'm going to be a mystery writer when I grow up. And she said, well, the week before I was going to be an archaeologist. And she said, well, Cathy, you're not the most patient person I know. Maybe you want to think some more. This week it was a mystery writer. And she said, you'd be good at that. But it'd be a good idea if you find a way to support yourself. So I suspect I'm not the only recovering lawyer who's gotten that advice. But again, it's a terrific education for all kinds of things. Interestingly, though, I never practiced criminal law. I've spent a lot of time in criminal courts, but never practiced criminal law.
So here's a question we have from one of our viewers this evening, and that's, are you working on a book now? What's your next project? What can you tell us?
Oh, and being locked away could not have come at a better time. I just finished the page edits for another book for History Press, Eastern North Carolina Crime Cases, which is fascinating. It's of course more rural, very different from Charlotte, but such interesting cases out of there, and a couple of women that are so scary they make my hair stand on end. Wow. But I just finished the page edits on that. That'll be out May 11th, so I'm very excited about that. And I'm also doing the page edits on a book called Create. When I was teaching at Queens in the McColl School of Business, developed an elective in creativity, which frankly was the most fun I did in a very fun career of teaching. Wow. But this book has taken 10 years to incubate, but it's going to come out in the next month or two, on developing your own creative process, which is sort of that happy collision between my very left brain life as a lawyer and college professor, and my very creative side on the other side. And it's just been great fun. I love how that's coming together.
Do you think you'll go back to your Southern Fried series?
I don't know. Avery in those books is a lawyer in a small town in upstate South Carolina, which was my way to go back home and visit. But she's also in her 30s and I am not. So I think that might be a little hard. I've had invitations to do that. I left that series of my own accord, my own decision. And I don't think I will. I am working now, though, on another novel. We're just going to have to wait and see how that turns out.
Well, we can't wait to see what that's going to be like.
I thought it was going to be a novel, but no, then a dead body showed up, and what are you going to do? Yeah.
So besides working on all your page edits, what else are you finding? Any fun activities you have going on? Any tips, podcast suggestions to share with us while we're all at home?
There are there's some really, really bad crime podcasts, but there's some really good ones as well. A journalist that I worked with on the Edgar's Mystery Writer Awards several years ago, Chris Goffard, did Dirty John, and he's got a new one out as well. His podcasts are fantastic. I've mostly been writing and reading and walking. This is an introvert's dream. Not only, I'm not even allowed to go out. So it's just, how can it get any better? I'm sorry, all my extrovert friends will probably tear their hair out, but.
So we have another question from our viewer that says, love all the real stories, and how have those influenced your Southern Fried series? Or I guess, or did they?
Well, that's the interesting thing. I did start researching when I was writing that series, because I'm just a fiend about accurate detail. Now, maybe writing this, that series was sort of light and supposed to be entertaining, but the cases are rooted in real cases, and the details are as accurate as I could possibly make them when talking about law or forensics. And so it very much informed it. And again, as with most things that I do, I got a little obsessive about it. But my editor at the time, who was just an icon in mystery publishing, Ruth Cavan, she was still riding the bus in from White Plains, or riding the train from White Plains and taking the bus down to the Flatiron Building to St. Martin's every day on into her 90s. So she was incredible. And the only time she ever sent me a really long note was in a case where I had used poison. And she said, well, this just is a particularly gruesome sort of death, which I thought was deserved in the case. And she said, can you not just have them take a poison and go, to sleep? Well, that was the longest note she ever gave me. And she got back from me the longest note I ever wrote to her. I haven't studied poisons for 25 years to make up something that simply does not exist. So, there is no such poison. And so we resolved it with actually just a change in one sentence. But I am just absolutely rabid about accuracy. You can't always be perfect. Things are going to get messed up. And in these new books, the new true crime books, I am only using reported sources. It's not investigative journalism. I'm not going back and knocking on people's doors. But I did want to synthesize what was there. So the storytelling, I hope, in the true crime comes from being a novelist. And certainly the forensic detail and the legal detail informed the fiction.
Great. We had a comment that I wanted to pass on to you. Stephanie Hale says that Create was the most fun class she ever took at Queens. She loves seeing you and misses you.
Oh, that's great to hear. And Stephanie was amazing fun in class. She's working on a podcast now that people need to keep an eye out on it. It's about people's jobs. It's really cool. She's working with folks at WFAE on that.
Great. Thanks for that tip. And a question from, I think it's Alicia, if I'm pronouncing that right, Alicia Susan. What was the last book you read, or what are you reading now that you might recommend to us?
Oh my goodness. I just finished Eric Larson's new book, The Splendid and the Vile, on Churchill in 1940. Now, to go through a pandemic and read about the bombing of London at the same time was a little intense, but Eric Larson's a wonderful storyteller. And if you do happen to be watching and like true crime and haven't read his Devil in the White City, it is fantastic, because
which is in place in Chicago?
In Chicago during the World's Fair. So you have the fair, and you have a very famous serial killer operating at the same time in the late 1800s. And he did a brilliant job with that book. But this one with Churchill is just good storytelling.
Great tip. I've heard other people recommend that one as well, but I haven't read it myself. Any other questions from our viewers this evening? Let me see. We didn't share that we were drinking a beer or a cocktail for Final Draft. Actually, I'm having a little iced tea, the Southern drink of choice here with Cathy.
That glass looked really huge when you held it up.
Well, Cathy, it has been a delight to have you with us this evening. We really appreciate that. And I want to remind folks, if they'd love to hear more from Cathy, that actually, Cathy, you did a podcast with the Charlotte Readers podcast with Landis Wade back on season 2. And the library, we host that on our library's website. So you can find the Charlotte Readers podcast, or just Google search that and you'll find an episode with Cathy. So I'd encourage you to check that out. And also remember that you can find Charlotte True Crime Stories. We hope you've been inspired to maybe check that out a little further. Park Road Books and Main Street Books have copies and can ship one of those to you to your home while we're all staying in. You can also check out a digital copy that you can download from the library's website. So if you go to cmlibrary.org, you can find that as well. A reminder, also check out Town Brewing. They may have a great growler or a nosh for you to pick up this evening. And then would love to remind you that please go to the Library Foundation's webpage, which is foundation.cmlibrary.org. And you can find out more about this whole series, Final Draft Home Edition, who will be having next week, next Tuesday, will be Mark DeCastrique. And he's a mystery writer. His latest book is Murder in Rat Alley. So we're excited to bring Mark with us next week. And we, of course, also always appreciate your support, if you can at this time, of always supporting the library. And you can find more information about that and how to do that on the Library Foundation's page, as well as to sign up for our e-news and emails that we'll send to you to keep you up to date on all other things that are happening and going on with the library and the Library Foundation while libraries are closed. We have seen an amazing surge in library use while library facilities are closed and all the digital resources, and so we're very grateful of that. One stat I heard today, which was amazing, was that in the month of March, we had an additional 10,000 downloads just on one of our platforms, Hoopla. So if you like to download books through Hoopla, 10,000 additional downloads during the month of March. And that's incredible use that we are glad that people are using. It does come at a cost to the library. So again, we'd always appreciate your support. Cathy, again, thank you so much for being a fantastic author tonight on our second episode of Final Draft, Home Edition. And we hope that we will see everyone again next Tuesday night. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.